The painting that would save a life hung forgotten in the back corner of a failing gallery. Its creator, a failing artist named Thomas Evans, unaware of its true power to inspire. It was a canvas of blues and purples, a solitary figure walking through a storm toward a distant light. And for 3 months, it had gathered dust in Marion's gallery on 4th Street, marked down twice and still unsold. Thomas stood before it now, hands thrust deep in the pockets of his worn corduroy jacket, shoulders hunched against the weight of yet another disappointment. His breath created small clouds in the unheated gallery space, the owner having cut back on expenses as foot traffic dwindled. "I'm sorry, Tom." Marion's voice was gentle behind him, her small frame wrapped in a thick cardigan. "The exhibition closes tomorrow. I've done everything I could." He nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. At 34, he had spent 15 years pursuing a dream that seemed to be slipping through his fingers like water. His bank account was nearly empty, his apartment lease ending in 3 weeks, and the stack of rejection letters from galleries across the city had become his most consistent artistic output. "You can pick up the unsold pieces tomorrow afternoon." Her hand touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture of sympathy that made his skin crawl. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted someone, anyone, to look at his work and feel something. "Thanks for trying," he managed, his voice rough. After Marion retreated to her office, Thomas approached the painting. "Weathering the Storm," he'd titled it. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the textured surface. The piece had emerged during the darkest period of his life, after his father's death and the subsequent unraveling of his family. He'd painted it in a fury of grief, the brushstrokes violent and raw. Yet the figure in the painting moved forward, always forward, toward that impossible light. "Why won't anyone see you?" he whispered to the canvas. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking the gallery windows and casting watery shadows across the floor. Thomas pulled his jacket tighter and turned away from his failure, stepping out into the cold November afternoon, unaware that in less than 24 hours, this very painting would change not just one life, but his own as well. Sarah Chen hadn't planned on entering the gallery. She hadn't planned much of anything that day beyond putting one foot in front of the other, moving through the world like a ghost. The rain had driven her inside, seeking shelter after wandering the city streets for hours, her mind a storm of its own. The gallery was empty, save for an older woman typing at a computer behind a desk. The woman glanced up, offered a tight smile, then returned to her work. Sarah was grateful for the lack of attention. Her red-rimmed eyes and rain-soaked appearance weren't inviting conversation. 3 months since the diagnosis. 2 weeks since she'd stopped treatment. 1 day since she'd written the note that now sat on her kitchen table, its edges weighted down by a small stone she'd kept since childhood. She moved through the gallery aimlessly, barely registering the landscapes and still lifes, the abstract compositions that might have once captured her attention. Art had been her refuge once, before medical bills and endless appointments, before the word terminal entered her vocabulary at 32. And then she saw it, tucked away in a corner. A painting of a storm. Sarah stopped, her breath catching. The canvas pulled her forward until she stood directly before it, close enough to see each brushstroke. The figure in the painting walked through darkness, but there was something in their posture, a determination, a refusal to surrender, that made her chest tighten. "It's being taken down tomorrow." Sarah startled, turning to find the gallery owner standing nearby. "The exhibition is ending," the woman continued. "The artist is picking up his unsold pieces tomorrow afternoon." "Unsold?" Sarah looked back at the painting, disbelieving. "No one bought this?" The woman, Marion, according to her name tag, sighed. "It's been a difficult time for galleries. For artists too. This piece, it's powerful, but people want comfortable art these days. Things that don't make them feel too much." Sarah's hand moved to her chest, resting over her heart. "How much is it?" Marion named a figure that would have been impossible for Sarah a year ago. Now, with her savings meant only for a funeral no one would attend, it seemed almost meaningless. "I'll take it," she said, the words surprising her as much as the gallery owner. 20 minutes later, Sarah left the gallery with the painting wrapped carefully in brown paper, protected from the rain by a plastic covering. She carried it to her small apartment 6 blocks away, her arms aching with the weight, but something else aching more. A feeling she couldn't name, something like hope, or perhaps just curiosity about the person who had created this work that seemed to understand her completely. At home, she propped the painting against her living room wall and sat on the floor before it, cross-legged like a child. The note on her kitchen table suddenly seemed distant, belonging to a different person. She stared at the painting until night fell, until the storm inside her quieted enough that she could hear her own thoughts again. She didn't tear up the note. Not yet, but she didn't act on it either. Instead, she found herself reaching for her laptop, typing the artist's name, Thomas Evans, into the search bar, wanting to know who had seen into her soul without ever meeting her. Thomas returned to the gallery the following afternoon, a rented truck parked illegally outside. He had given himself exactly 15 minutes to collect his unsold work, nearly the entire exhibition, before the parking ticket became inevitable. Marion greeted him with an unexpected smile. "I have some good news," she said, leading him through the gallery. "You made a sale yesterday. After you left." He felt a flicker of something, not quite hope, but a distant cousin to it. Which one? Weathering the storm, a young woman came in, saw it, and bought it on the spot. Full asking price. Thomas stopped walking. "You're serious?" "Completely." Marion's smile widened. She was quite moved by it. Tom stood in front of it for nearly 20 minutes before deciding to buy. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, trying to process this information. One sale didn't change his financial situation or his career trajectory, but someone had connected with his work. Someone had felt something. Did she leave her information? A name? Marion nodded. Sarah Chen. She left her email address in case you ever have another exhibition. Said your work spoke to her. Thomas repeated the name silently, committing it to memory. As he loaded the remaining canvases into the truck, he found himself wondering about this Sarah Chen, this stranger who had seen value in what he created when no one else had. Later that evening, in his studio apartment where canvases were stacked against every wall, Thomas sat at his computer, the blank email form open before him. He had typed and deleted a dozen variations of a thank you message, each sounding more desperate or pathetic than the last. What do you say to the one person who believed in your work when you'd almost stopped believing yourself? Finally, he typed *MS. Chen. Marion told me you purchased my painting, Weathering the Storm. I wanted to thank you personally. That piece means a great deal to me, and knowing it connected with someone else makes all the difference. With gratitude, Thomas Evans. He hit send before he could second-guess himself again, then leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would need to face reality, find a cheaper apartment, maybe look for graphic design work again, something to pay the bills while he figured out what came next. But tonight he allowed himself to feel that small victory, to imagine his painting hanging in someone's home, being seen. Sarah read the email 3 times, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had arrived just as she returned from her doctor's appointment, another in an endless series of check-ins that changed nothing but drained her limited energy. The painting had claimed the central wall of her living room, the only decoration in an otherwise Spartan space. For 2 nights she had fallen asleep on the couch beneath it, finding comfort in the strange companionship of the solitary figure pushing through the storm. She hadn't expected the artist to contact her, hadn't considered that her purchase might mean something to him too. She typed her response carefully, *Mr. Evans. Your painting found me at exactly the right moment. I don't know how to explain what it means to me, except to say that it reminded me that storms eventually end, even when you're in the darkest part. Thank you for creating something so honest. Sarah. She pressed send, then wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the November sky had darkened early, and rain continued to fall, a gentle, persistent rhythm against her windows. She made tea and curled up on the couch, gazing at the painting as she had every evening since bringing it home. The figure in the painting seemed different tonight, stronger somehow, the burden they carried more bearable. Sarah wondered what had inspired Thomas Evans to create this image, what storm he had weathered or was still moving through. Her phone chimed with an email notification less than 20 minutes after she'd sent her reply. Sarah, your message means more than you know. I painted that during a time when walking forward felt impossible, but necessary. If it brought you any comfort in your own storm, then perhaps I haven't failed as an artist after all. Would it be too forward to ask what drew you to the painting? I rarely get to hear how my work affects others. Thomas. Sarah read his words, feeling the weight of their shared experience across the digital divide. She touched her side where the pain had become a constant companion, a reminder of the cancer spreading through her body. How much should she share with this stranger? How honest could she be? Her reply came slowly, each word considered. Thomas, I'm facing a storm with no clear path forward. Your painting was the first thing in months that made me feel understood. The figure isn't giving up, even surrounded by darkness. I needed that reminder. I don't know much about art criticism, but I know what moved me. The honesty in those brushstrokes. There's pain there, but also determination. It felt true in a world where too many things feel false. If that helps you as an artist, I'm glad. Sarah. She sent the email, then set her phone aside, exhausted by the small exchange, but also feeling a connection she hadn't expected. A thread linking her to someone who understood storms, even if he didn't know the specific nature of hers. Their correspondence continued over the next week, tentative at first, then growing more open as days passed. Thomas found himself rushing to check his email between shifts at the cafe, where he'd taken a job to cover rent on his new, smaller apartment. Sarah's messages became a lifeline during a period when his art supplies remained packed in boxes, his creative spirit dormant. On the 9th day of their correspondence, Thomas took a risk. Sarah. This might seem strange, but would you consider meeting in person? There's a cafe near the gallery, Evergreen on 4th. They have good tea and better pastries. I'd like to hear more about your connection to the painting. If you're comfortable with that, no pressure. Our emails have been a bright spot during a difficult time, and I'm grateful for that either way. Thomas. He sent it during his lunch break, then spent the afternoon distracted, nearly mixing up 2 coffee orders and spilling milk across the counter. When his shift ended at 7, he checked his phone with trepidation, finding Sarah's reply waiting. Thomas. I can meet tomorrow at 2 if that works for you. Fair warning, I'm not at my best these days, but I would like to meet the person behind the painting that's keeping me company through sleepless nights. Evergreen on 4th sounds perfect. Sarah. Thomas read the message twice, surprised by both her acceptance and the hint at her struggles. Their emails had been personal but vague, circling around specific hardships while acknowledging their existence. He wondered what storm Sarah was weathering, what kept her awake at night beneath his painting. The next day, he arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, securing a quiet table by the window. He ordered tea for himself, nervously rearranging the sugar packets while he waited. He had brought his sketchbook, a habit more than an intention to draw, and found himself idly sketching the view outside. Rain-slicked streets, pedestrians hunched under umbrellas, the particular gray light of late autumn. When the bell above the door chimed at precisely 2 o'clock, Thomas looked up to see a slight woman entering, unwrapping a scarf from around her neck. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with short dark hair and a delicate frame that seemed somehow diminished, as though she had recently lost weight. But it was her eyes that caught him, large, expressive, and carrying a depth of experience that belied her age. He stood, raising a hand in tentative greeting, and watched recognition dawn on her face. Sarah? He asked as she approached the table. She nodded, offering a smile that transformed her tired features. Thomas, it's good to meet you. As she settled into the chair across from him, removing her damp coat, Thomas noticed her careful movements, the way she winced slightly when she twisted to hang the coat on her chair. I ordered tea, he said, suddenly nervous. But they have coffee too, or... Tea is perfect, she interrupted gently. Thank you. The waitress came, took Sarah's order for chamomile, and left them in an awkward silence punctuated by the cafe's ambient noise. Espresso machines hissing, conversations murmuring, rain tapping against windows. You're painting, Sarah said finally, her hands wrapped around the warm mug the waitress had brought. It's the first thing I see every morning, and the last thing at night. Thomas felt heat rise to his face. I'm honored, he said. Most of my work ends up in storage, or back in my apartment, staring at me accusingly. You're not painting now? She asked, her head tilting slightly. He shook his head. Not since the exhibition closed. I had to downsize, take a job at another cafe across town. Less artistic, but it pays rent. That's a shame, she said, and the genuine regret in her voice touched him. The world needs more of what you create. Thomas laughed softly without humor. The world seems ambivalent at best. You're literally the only person who bought anything from that exhibition. Then everyone else missed something important. Her conviction was startling. Thomas studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes, the pallor beneath her olive skin. Can I ask? He began carefully. What storm you're weathering? In your emails you mentioned... Sarah's gaze dropped to her tea. For a moment, he thought she might not answer, or might leave altogether. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible above the cafe noise. "I'm dying," she said simply. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hung between them, stark and enormous. Thomas felt his breath catch, a physical reaction to the casual delivery of such devastating information. "I'm sorry." He managed, the words woefully inadequate. "I didn't—" "It's okay," she interrupted. "You couldn't have known. And I'm not saying it for sympathy." She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "Your painting found me on a very dark day, Thomas. The darkest. I had made certain decisions. And then I saw your figure walking through that storm, and something shifted. I can't explain it better than that." Understanding dawned slowly. The painting had not just moved her. It had interrupted something final, something irreversible. "The light," he said quietly. "In the painting, the figure is walking toward it." Sarah nodded. "Even though it seems impossibly far away." She sipped her tea, then added, "I needed to be reminded that light exists, even in the middle of darkness. Even when you can't see the end of the storm." Thomas sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was sharing. Not just her diagnosis, but the depth of her despair and the small role his art had played in pulling her back from an edge. "How much time?" he began, then stopped, horrified at his presumption. But Sarah answered anyway. "Months, not years. I've stopped treatment. It was only making my remaining time more miserable." She offered a sad smile. "I'm trying to focus on quality over quantity now." Thomas nodded, unable to find words equal to the moment. Instead, he pushed his sketchbook and pencil across the table toward her. "Would you mind if I drew you?" he asked softly. "Just a quick sketch. Something about your eyes." Surprise registered on her face, followed by a genuine smile that reached those remarkable eyes. "No one's ever asked to draw me before." As rain continued outside, casting shifting patterns of light across the cafe floor, Thomas began to sketch. Sarah sipped her tea, sometimes watching him work, sometimes gazing out at the wet streets. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. It was the beginning of an unexpected friendship, forged in the shadow of mortality and illuminated by art's capacity to communicate across the boundaries of individual experience. A connection that would transform them both in ways neither could yet imagine. December arrived with bitter winds and early darkness. Thomas and Sarah developed a routine, meeting at Evergreen on 4th every third day when Sarah's energy permitted. He would sketch her while they talked, capturing the changing angles of light on her face, the subtle shifts in her expressions. Thomas hadn't touched his paint since the exhibition closed, but his sketchbook filled with Sarah. Sarah laughing over a story from his childhood, Sarah contemplative while watching snow fall outside the cafe windows, Sarah with her eyes closed, listening to music playing softly through the speakers overhead. On their 6th meeting, she arrived looking more tired than usual, moving with careful deliberation to their regular table. "Bad day?" he asked gently as she lowered herself into the chair. She nodded, unwinding her scarf. "The pain was worse last night. Didn't sleep much." Thomas signaled the waitress for Sarah's usual chamomile, then reached into his bag. "I brought you something," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. "It's nothing, really. I thought you might like it." Sarah accepted the package with surprise, her thin fingers working carefully at the simple brown paper. Inside was a small frame sketch. Sarah at the cafe window, her profile illuminated by winter light. A moment of perfect stillness he had captured weeks earlier. "Thomas," she whispered, tracing the glass with her fingertip. "This is beautiful." He shrugged, embarrassed by her reaction. "It's just a sketch." "No," she said firmly. "It's how you see me. Not sick, not diminished, just present." Her eyes met his, bright with emotion. "Thank you." Something shifted between them that afternoon. A deepening of trust, perhaps, or recognition of what their friendship had become in such a short time. When they parted, Sarah hugged him briefly, the sketch clutched carefully in one hand, her body fragile against his. 3 days later, she didn't come to the cafe. Thomas waited for 2 hours, watching the door each time the bell chimed, his tea growing cold before him. Finally, he tried calling her cell phone, something he'd never done before, though they had exchanged numbers, just in case. No answer. That evening, he sent an email, trying to keep his worry from seeping into his words. "Sarah, missed you today. Hope everything is okay. Let me know if you need anything. Thomas." The response came near midnight, brief enough to send fear coursing through him. "In hospital. Saint." Mary's, room 412. Sorry. He was there at 8 the next morning, having called in sick to his cafe job. A small bunch of yellow daffodils, incongruous with the season, purchased at considerable expense from a specialty florist, clutched in his hand. Sarah's hospital room was dimly lit, the beeping of monitors creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the rain tapping against the window. She lay against white pillows, looking smaller than he remembered, her short hair stark against the institutional bedding. Her eyes opened as he entered, recognition followed by embarrassment crossing her features. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice raspy. Thomas approached the bed, setting the flowers on her bedside table. "Of course I did." He pulled a chair closer, settling beside her. What happened?" Sarah attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing unexpected. Pain got worse, fever developed. My oncologist wanted to monitor me." She gestured weakly at the IV in her arm. "Fluids, antibiotics, pain management. The usual adventure." Thomas reached for her hand without thinking, enveloping her cold fingers in his warm ones. How long will you be here?" "Another day, maybe 2. Then back home to my exciting life of Netflix and prescription medications." Her attempt at humor was undermined by the weariness in her voice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Thomas still holding her hand, both watching the patterns rain made on the window. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "I've been thinking about what happens to the painting," she said quietly. "After I'm gone." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "Sarah." "No, listen," she interrupted. "It's important to me. I don't have family, not close family anyway. My parents are gone, no siblings. Just some cousins back in California who I haven't seen in years." She squeezed his hand weakly. "I want the painting to go back to you." He shook his head. "It's yours. You bought it." "And it saved me," she agreed. "It gave me these extra months, this friendship with you. But eventually it should return to its creator." Her eyes held his, intense despite her exhaustion. "Promise me." Unable to deny her, Thomas nodded. "I promise." Sarah relaxed against her pillows, seemingly satisfied. Then with characteristic directness, she changed the subject. "Why did you stop painting?" The question caught him off guard. "What? You're still drawing, all these sketches of me, but you haven't painted since the exhibition." "Why?" Thomas looked down at their joined hands, considering his answer. "I lost faith, I guess, in my ability to communicate anything meaningful. The exhibition failing just confirmed what I'd been fearing, that I've been wasting my time, chasing something I'm not good enough to achieve." Sarah's laugh surprised him, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile room. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Your painting literally saved my life, Thomas. I'd say that's about as meaningful as communication gets." He smiled despite himself. "One person out of how many who saw it? Maybe that's enough," she said simply. "Maybe reaching exactly the right person at exactly the right moment is worth more than reaching many people in a shallow way." Her eyes drifted closed briefly, the conversation taxing her limited strength. "You should be painting again." "I will," he said, making a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. When I find the right subject." Sarah opened her eyes, studying him with unexpected intensity. "Paint what saved you," she said. "Whatever got you through your storm. Whatever light you were walking toward." Before Thomas could respond, a nurse entered to check Sarah's vital signs, effectively ending their conversation. He stayed until visiting hours ended, sketching Sarah as she drifted in and out of sleep, her words echoing in his mind. "Paint what saved you." Sarah was released from the hospital 2 days later. Thomas helped her back to her apartment, struck by how sparse it was. The painting dominated the main wall of her living room, his small frame sketch now placed carefully on a side table, but little else personalized the space. No family photos, no accumulated keepsakes. It was the temporary dwelling of someone who knew they wouldn't need permanence. December progressed, marked by snowfall and holiday decorations appearing across the city. Sarah's strength fluctuated. Good days when they could still meet at the cafe, bad days when Thomas brought tea to her apartment and sat with her while she rested on the couch, his sketchbook always in hand. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, he arrived at her apartment to find her sitting on the floor before the painting, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat blasting from the radiators. "Sarah?" he questioned, closing the door behind him. She looked up, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. "I was thinking about light," she said by way of greeting. "It's the darkest day of the year, but after today, the light starts coming back." Little by little, Thomas set down the bag of groceries he'd brought, moving to sit beside her on the floor. They both gazed at the painting, the figure walking through the storm, the distant light that had given Sarah hope on her darkest day. "I started painting again," he said quietly. She turned to him, delight illuminating her tired face. "Really? What are you working on?" "It's not finished," he hedged. "But it's something new, something about light returning after darkness. Will you show me when it's done?" He nodded, unable to tell her that she was the subject. Sarah in profile at the cafe window, illuminated by winter light. The moment from the sketch expanded into a larger work that had consumed his evenings for weeks. They ordered takeout that night, eating on the floor beneath the painting while snow fell silently outside. Sarah's appetite was minimal, but her spirit seemed stronger, engaged in a way he hadn't seen since before her hospitalization. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said suddenly, setting aside her barely touched container of curry. Thomas considered the request, then offered, "I almost gave up art completely after my father died. He was the only one who really supported it, who saw something worthwhile in what I was doing. When he was gone, it felt pointless to continue." Sarah listened intently. "What changed your mind?" "I realized that painting was how I processed his loss, how I understood my own grief. Without it, I was just drowning." He gestured toward the painting on her wall. "That storm, that was the year after he died. Walking forward was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but the only alternative was standing still forever." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My turn?" "If you want." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "The day I bought your painting, I had written a goodbye note. I was tired of fighting, tired of pain, tired of watching myself disappear piece by piece." Her voice remained steady, matter of fact. "I'd made a plan. Everything was arranged." Thomas felt his throat constrict. Though this wasn't entirely new information, she had hinted at it during their first meeting at the cafe. "The rain drove me into the gallery," she continued. "Just chance or fate or whatever you want to call it. And there was your painting. Someone else who knew what it was to be in a storm, to keep walking even when it seemed impossible." She looked at him directly. "Your art didn't just speak to me, Thomas. It interrupted me. It made me pause long enough to reconsider." They sat in silence after her confession, the weight of what might have been hanging between them. Finally, Thomas reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I'm glad you walked into that gallery," he said simply. Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face despite the illness that had hollowed her cheeks and dulled her complexion. "Me too." When he left that night, she hugged him at the door, longer than usual, her thin frame feeling bird-like in his embrace. "Thank you for the light," she whispered against his shoulder. Christmas passed quietly. Sarah had no family celebrations to attend, and Thomas had long ago distanced himself from his mother and siblings, whose discomfort with his artistic pursuits had created a gulf he didn't know how to bridge. They spent the day in Sarah's apartment, Thomas bringing a small tree he decorated with paper stars and miniature paintings, tiny landscapes and abstract compositions that made Sarah laugh with delight when she saw them. "You made these?" she asked, touching one of the ornaments gently. "Last night," he admitted. "Kinda couldn't sleep." Her condition had deteriorated in the days following the solstice. The pain medications left her foggy, and her periods of alertness grew shorter. But on Christmas, she seemed to rally, sitting up for longer stretches, even eating a portion of the meal Thomas had prepared. As evening fell, they sat together on her couch, a movie playing quietly on her laptop, largely ignored in favor of conversation. Snow fell outside, creating a cocoon of silence around the apartment. "I have something for you," Sarah said during a lull, reaching for a small package on the side table. "It's not much." Thomas accepted the carefully wrapped gift, touched by the effort it must have taken her to prepare it. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, the cover embossed with his initials. "Open it," she urged. The first page held a handwritten note. "Thomas, for the artist who reminded me that light exists even in darkness. Fill these pages with what you see, the beauty, the struggle, the human experience in all its complexity. Your vision matters. With gratitude and love, Sarah." He looked up, finding her watching him with a gentle smile. "Thank you," he managed, emotion making his voice rough. "There's more," she said. He turned the page to find a photograph. Sarah standing beside his painting in her apartment, her hand resting lightly on the frame, her expression one of peaceful contemplation. "For after," she said quietly, "so you'll remember how much it mattered to one person." Thomas closed the sketchbook, unable to speak. Instead, he reached for her hand, holding it between both of his, trying to communicate what words couldn't contain. They sat that way until Sarah drifted to sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Thomas remained beside her, watching snow accumulate on the windowsill, feeling both the fragility and the strength of their connection. A friendship forged through art and honesty, shaped by the knowledge of its inevitable end. January brought brutal cold and Sarah's final hospitalization. The cancer had spread aggressively, and her pain could no longer be managed at home. Thomas visited daily, bringing his sketchbook and occasionally his paints, working on small pieces while she slept. The painting in her apartment, Weathering the Storm, had been carefully wrapped and placed in storage by the building manager, along with her few personal possessions. Thomas had arranged everything according to her wishes, a task that felt both intimate and heartbreaking. On a frigid morning in mid-January, he arrived at the hospital to find Sarah awake and unexpectedly lucid, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. "I finished it," he said by way of greeting, setting his portfolio case against the wall. She smiled, a ghost of her former expression but genuine nonetheless. "The painting? You'll show me?" He nodded, unzipping the case and carefully removing the canvas. Smaller than Weathering the Storm, but rendered with the same intensity. He propped it against the chair where she could see it from her bed. Sarah's breath caught audibly. The painting showed her in profile at the cafe window, winter light streaming in to illuminate her face. But Thomas had transformed the moment, surrounding her with a subtle glow that seemed to emanate both from outside and from within her. The background held suggestions of the storm from his earlier painting, but receding, breaking apart around the light that centered on her figure. "Thomas," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's beautiful. It's called The Light Returns," he said quietly, moving to sit beside her bed. "You were right. I needed to paint what saved me." Sarah's questioning look prompted him to continue. "Meeting you," he explained, "seeing my work through your eyes, understanding that connecting deeply with even one person makes the effort worthwhile." He reached for her hand, now so thin that the bones were clearly visible beneath translucent skin. "You saved me from giving up, Sarah. You helped me find my purpose again." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her smile remained. "We saved each other then." They sat together through the afternoon, Thomas sketching her one final time while she drifted between sleep and wakefulness. As daylight began to fade, she opened her eyes with sudden clarity. "Promise me something else," she said, her voice barely audible. Thomas leaned closer. "Anything. Keep painting storms, but always include the light. Someone else might need to see it someday." He nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. "And remember," she continued, "the storm in your painting? The figure was still walking, still moving forward. That's what matters." Thomas held her hand until she fell asleep again, her breathing growing more labored as evening deepened into night. He stayed until the nurse gently suggested he get some rest, promising to call if there was any change. Sarah Chen died peacefully in the early hours of the next morning, the winter moon casting silver light through her hospital window. Thomas received the call as dawn broke, the news expected but devastating nonetheless. In the days that followed, he learned that Sarah had made all her own arrangements. A simple cremation, no service. Her will, updated in December, contained specific instructions about her few possessions. The framed sketch Thomas had given her was to be donated to St. Mary's Hospital to hang in the oncology ward. Her books were to go to the public library. And the painting, Weathering the Storm, was to be returned to Thomas, with a letter he hadn't known existed. 1 month after Sarah's death, Thomas stood in his new studio, a small but well-lit space he had rented with the proceeds from selling 3 new paintings, all inspired by his friendship with Sarah. On the wall hung Weathering the Storm, returned to him according to her wishes. Beside it hung The Light Returns, the painting of Sarah at the cafe window, which a local gallery owner had seen and immediately offered to exhibit, along with a series of works Thomas was now creating about connection, resilience, and transformation. In his hands was Sarah's letter, delivered by her attorney along with the painting. He had read it dozens of times since receiving it, each reading both painful and healing. "Dear Thomas, if you're reading this, I've completed my journey through the storm. I want you to know what your art meant to me, how it found me at my darkest moment and showed me a path forward, even if that path was shorter than I might have wished. Your painting didn't just save my life temporarily, it transformed the time I had left. Instead of ending in despair, I found purpose in our friendship, in watching you rediscover your gift. The months we shared were the most meaningful of my life, filled with honesty and understanding I never expected to find. Please don't put "Weathering the Storm" in storage or sell it to a stranger. Keep it where you can see it while you work. A reminder that art matters, that your vision touches lives in ways you may never fully know. Your failing exhibition wasn't a failure at all. It put your painting exactly where it needed to be, precisely when I needed to find it. Perhaps that was its purpose all along. Continue creating, Thomas. Someone else is weathering a storm right now, needing to be reminded that light exists, that moving forward is possible even when it seems impossible. Be that reminder. With love and gratitude. Sarah. Thomas carefully folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of his work table. Then he turned to the blank canvas on his easel, picking up his brush with steady hands. Outside, February snow was melting in patches, revealing hints of ground beneath. Daylight lasted noticeably longer now, the incremental return of light that Sarah had noted on the solstice continuing its ancient cycle. Thomas began to paint. A storm breaking, a figure emerging into light, carrying forward the lesson he and Sarah had learned together. That even in our darkest moments, connection can save us. That art has the power to reach across the void of human isolation. That one painting can indeed save a life, revealing its true power to inspire. And in the act of creation, he found himself weathering his own grief, walking steadily toward the light of a new understanding. That some connections transcend their brevity, leaving permanent marks on our souls and our art, becoming part of the light we carry forward into whatever storms may come.